So here we are back at it again. Hilarious
Hey,
Humanitarians, Deanna on that end. Me over here,
hello,
I'm
hello.
Frances. Hi.
I
So,
am Deanna. I am here,
all right,
still in my
Deanna
closet.
is broadcasting currently from her closet. It's not a closet. It is a home office.
Yes, yes. Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
and
My
just
home office.
yeah, and just so you know, Deanna's in Ventura. I'm in the beautiful city of Fresno, California, where I happen to work in radio, and both of us work in mental health. And in this episode of Hilarious Humanitarians, which by the way, I'm so sure I'm going to mess up a couple of times, like slip in my radio show. It's just going to happen.
It's okay. It's where you work.
Yeah,
We
we
love it. I love the show.
we wanted to focus on this one now that you've gotten to know us a little bit about why it is we wanted to start a podcast, because this has been something that I think has been floating around subconsciously and consciously for a while, but we decided, you know what? This is it. Time to
Let's
time
do
to
it.
try it. So, with that in mind, I think a great place to start is where it is that we work both in clinical settings. Again, Deanna, your background is social work, correct?
Yes, I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of California out of grad school.
Where'd you go to grad
I
school?
I went to the University of Southern California, USC. Go Trojans. Um, so that's where I went to grad school. Where did you go to grad school?
I went to California State University, Fresno. Go Dogs. I don't think we
Awesome.
ever
Oh,
crossed
dogs.
Bulldogs. I don't think we ever crossed paths really in the sportsing world, but not that I would know anything about it. But
USC, like I had like the tailgating season pass, and I'm going to lose a lot of people right here, but I would go just for the social aspect, and then I would go to the game and zone out and stare at the clouds. I have a
I would go for the
that way.
food. So we're both
Yes.
on the same page there. Yeah. So out of grad school, I know we both worked our fair share of jobs, but now we're in, like, I would say, legitimate clinical positions, right?
Right. Mhm.
Now you have one that I know for sure. Like, I know that there are some things I could do, but I might not like. But then I also know my limits. And I know you were doing something that I could never do. Inpatient psychiatric work.
Yes, yes. Um, let me start by saying, out of grad school, I know my type of personality. It is really funny that I'm doing this podcast from my closet, because I'm the type of personality that needs to be like running around in circles, and I thrive in environments that are a little bit unpredictable, and so working in my closet is not as unpredictable as I would hope. But so out of grad school, I worked briefly in hospice, and then I moved to a hospital working in the ER, which I think will be like my one true love. But right now we're broken up. I had to just, I had to move on, and then I just basically transitioned to inpatient psychiatric care at a psychiatric hospital, because quite frankly, when I was working in the ER, I was seeing everybody, all sorts of traumas coming in, but my primary focus was psych patients. And I just realized, like, I think I should just be in a psych hospital where everybody's on the same page, like everybody's there doing the same thing. It was a little tough being in the ER as the only clinician, while the nurses are working on maybe somebody that came in as a car accident. Like it was just very isolating. I was working by myself a lot of times. So I just ended up moving to the psych hospital to be a
Now,
yeah.
this is where, I mean, I think people are going, well, a psych hospital. Like, everybody has in their head what they think that looks like.
Mhm.
A psych hospital is when you are basically a danger to yourself or others.
Right. Danger to yourself, to others, or you are gravely disabled, which means you cannot provide food, shelter, clothing for yourself.
Yeah. Now, and people sometimes will jokingly say, this is one of my number one, like, they'll make comments about like being 5150'd, or, somebody is psychotic, and they have no idea what that really means.
Right, right. Yeah, so the patients, on the outpatient side, I know you guys call the people that you treat clients, right?
Very much so. Yes. Clients.
Right. So in the inpatient side of the mental health field, we call them patients, or human beings that I'm
Imagine that.
treating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to have some clarity, if I say patients and Frances says clients, it's the same kind of thing. But so people will be put either on an involuntary 5150 hold, which at least for the state of California, I can only speak towards the state of California. 5150 is a 3-day hold where if you're involuntary, you cannot leave. Like, you cannot walk out the door. We're actually a locked hospital. But sometimes people do come involuntarily, but you obviously need to be agreeable to be taking medications and cooperative with treatment. And then 5150 holds expire after 3 days, and then either the person discharges home or the hold can be extended up to an additional 14 days, and that is up to the discretion of the doctor that is attending or treating.
Now, typically the way this works, too, is that sometimes people make it into an inpatient type setting because they're seeing somebody, in my world, on the outpatient side, and it's like, this is a little dangerous, a little scary. We got to make sure you're safe. So they go in, or they just come straight in from like people bringing them in, or it's sometimes the authorities. So a lot of the times the authorities, and there has to be like a plan. So you're not curing people.
No. And that's like a huge like misconception that people come into a psych hospital and we're supposed to have this like magic wand. And, by the way, I'm still looking for that magic wand. I think a lot of people think that mental health providers have like a magic wand where we just, hit people upside the head and all of a sudden you're cured. Wouldn't that be
awesome?
Amazing, right? I would be hitting a lot of people over the head with this wand, probably including some of my personal friends, but, where were we even going? See, this is how my brain works.
So we were talking about the fact that you get people stable in an inpatient,
right.
And then there's a step down process.
Yes. Sorry. Okay.
By the way, we're clearly professionals.
Clearly. See, this is why people feel comfortable around us, because it's like, oh, she's a little weird too. So, yes, in the inpatient world, people come in a state of crisis. They need their medications adjusted. They need to learn some new coping skills, which we hopefully can educate them on, encourage them to utilize once they leave. But it is their responsibility. I set them up with like an outpatient follow-up appointment. It is their responsibility to follow up with outpatient treatment, such as the psychiatrist, a therapist, to continue on either it's a medication regimen or to continue the therapeutic process, talk therapy, going to support groups. So what I was saying before, my brain trailed off, is a lot of times I get phone calls from family members about their loved one who's in the hospital, and they'll say to me, like, do not send them home until they're fixed. And then that is just an opportunity for me to educate the families on like managing people's expectations, like what can we do, what can't we do, and to encourage them to also get support themselves. Like, I oftentimes will refer families to NAMI, National Association for Mental Health. NAMI has really great family support groups, because a lot of times the families don't know what to do either. Yeah, there's definitely this huge misconception, National Alliance on Mental Health, that we can cure everybody.
So I think this really kind of lends well. You mentioned it. It's the patient's responsibility. Now we've jumped from your end. You work in inpatient psych, which is kind of that far left, right? But
right.
Mental health is a spectrum. Now I work currently in an outpatient, like typical therapist's office. We have a psychiatrist that's there, and he makes referrals. He sees people and sends them to me, or people just come in looking for a therapist and they come to me. But I've worked in various areas. I've worked in outpatient addiction. So when people are recognizing they're having addiction issues, and we can get a whole nother podcast on that. But it's the patient's responsibility. And I know that sometimes we get frustrated family members who are trying to get people into treatment to get some help, right? Like, you're worried, you're seeing these flags, these signs. People are starting to
decompensate.
Yeah.
Right.
See, I know all the big words. But anyway, it has to be the patient responsibility. So I think what we're trying to do with this podcast, and the reason why we started it, is we want people to know that there's a continuum of treatments and options and resources if you're just not feeling like you're your best self. And all of us
Right.
carry with us a whole lot of baggage, a whole lot of dark secrets that maybe we don't want to go and just unload on some stranger because you're worried like, oh, I'm going to go see a therapist. What does that say about me? And so we want to talk about that. Real quick, I want to give you, like, Deanna, I haven't told you this story, but I want to give you a prime example of the stigma that goes with seeking help on any level with mental health. We talked about this in the last segment, that I have 2 kids, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I work in mental health. This is what my kids are around. And the other day, my younger one was being just a brat, an absolute brat. And I said something and he's like, I'm triggered and you want me to talk about my emotions. So this is me talking about my emotions. And I'm like, God, I got exactly what I asked for.
My future.
Right.
My future with my daughter.
And my 7-year-old looks at me with tears in his eyes and goes, Mom, don't make me go to a therapist.
Starts so early. It starts so early.
And I was like, who do you think you're talking to? Like, where did
Right.
this come from? So I don't know where he picked that up, but at 7, he thinks you're broken if you got to go to a therapist. And his mom's a therapist.
Right. Oh, God. Yeah.
So what I wanted to do was talk about in this podcast, like what it is like we're trying to get across with this. Like, we talked about patient responsibility. We talked about people have to want to make a change, but you can make changes without just checking yourself into inpatient or without going and deciding you need to see a psychiatrist. Like, that's kind of a revelation you have to come to on your own.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm wondering, like, while we're talking about this, like, I will admit myself, like, as a therapist, as a practicing therapist, like, I too have been in situations like throughout my life having, bouts of depression here and there, or a lot of anxiety. And like, I even was stubborn about going to a therapist. Like, have you had a similar experience about like going to seek therapy?
So for me, I think, once or twice in high school, maybe my mom took me to somebody and I did not connect. Like, I'm sorry. I was like 15. I'm not going to connect with a 60-year-old no matter where he went to school. Right.
Right.
I was like, this is a joke. But my story is that it was in my early 20s, before I had kids, and maybe right around the time that I was getting married, that I realized something just wasn't right. Like, and actually it was my primary care doctor who I basically broke down to that I had an eating disorder I hadn't told anybody about. And he was like, crap, send her somewhere. So I appreciate that, because he did send me to somebody to get help. And I saw a therapist. And that's when I realized that basically based on my circumstances and also the brain chemistry, and things like your brain chemistry, just like your eye color, can run in families, that I was clinically depressed. And that had manifested in ways that got me to where I was. So the opposite of you, I really kind of embraced therapy and then decided I could become a therapist because I had seen this drastic change. And it's still a process. I mean, we're like 12 years later and I still don't have anything figured out. But I will shout from the rooftops that, I see my therapist, kind of pretty regularly based on the field that I'm in and the way life has panned out. But you don't have to see him forever. But to answer your question, I have no problem telling people I have a therapist. I have to take medication, and that's just my life. And so if that kind of takes down the barrier for me, like, I'll put myself out there and I dare you. I mean, I don't have my shit together, but like I do a pretty good job of managing it. So I wouldn't say like I'm crazy.
Right. And what I think is really important too is for people to realize, well, I actually want to take a step back. Like, I do want to say that it was in my, early 20s.
It always is when you're stubborn.
Right. And obviously we have some residual effects of that stubbornness. It definitely is hardwired in there. But it was in my early 20s where I'm like, I don't need therapy. Like, I don't want to go talk to a stranger. That feels really uncomfortable. Now, my mind has definitely switched. And it's not just because I'm in the field as a therapist, but just realizing like how valuable it is to talk to somebody who's objective and non-judgmental and just to kind of get it out out, just to say it out loud, like what you're dealing with. That way you're not just walking around in the world with this, huge thing that feels at times like a secret or just like a heavy weight. With that said, I do want to say that I guess this is an element of like self-sabotaging or not having like clear expectations or being able to manage your own expectations. But I hear a lot of times people will say, I went to see a therapist, they sucked, or it just didn't feel right, and so I never want to see a therapist ever again. I think that there is a lot of pressure on therapists to be like, once again, like a cure-all for people.
Fix me.
Right. And at the end of the day, like, therapy is a therapeutic relationship. It's just a connection with somebody who has been trained to do talk therapy. But there's this very important piece that people oftentimes miss, which is it's like with anything, like with friendship or a relationship, like you have to build some rapport and there has to be a connection. And oftentimes it doesn't happen right out of the gate, so give it a couple sessions to see if you feel better. But if you don't, that doesn't mean therapy is not going to work for you. It just means that therapist was just not a good fit, which is totally fine, which is totally normal. It happens. I just encourage people, just try it again. Like, how many times, like, why are we so quick to write off therapy if it didn't work the first time? Like, do we do that with like anything else in life?
Like dating or like
right.
your family or your kids? Like there's times you don't like your kids.
Right. Like, exactly. Like I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. My dog pooped on the floor. Like, all right, I've had it. You're gone, dog. Like, no, like you pick up the poop and then you go, something needs to change. We need to fix something. And if not, like maybe we need a different alternative so that dog stops, crapping on the carpet.
Now, if your therapist does that, then definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Walk out slowly, like just kind of like skirt. Don't put your back towards the therapist. Just kind of walk out the door, slowly, smiling. People really kind of set up this self-sabotaging like expectation of the therapist, like you're supposed to tell me exactly what I need to do, be everything to me and cure my problems, and if you don't, then obviously therapy doesn't work, therapy sucks, and I'm never doing it again. It's not fair to you, as a human being who's trying to heal and trying to get some greater perspective on what's going on.
So speaking of that, we talked about in the last podcast kind of who you were and how you got started, because if you don't know, if you're just tuning in because you randomly found us, first of all, score for you. Secondly, Deanna has an Instagram account called Hilarious Humanitarians. As you can see, we're super creative, and for the name of this podcast, just added an S to the end of it. That's me. But you started it because you realized that sometimes part of this journey of feeling better is putting the good stuff in. Like I call it, like, when you eat like a ton of junk food and you're not sleeping, like you start to feel like crap. Like that's the obvious end game of that. So when you start to eat better and you start to sleep more, and you can't because you have a 1-year-old, but you start to generally feel better. And I feel that way about the things we consume emotionally and mentally as well. It's not just physically. And that's where your Instagram comes in.
Right. So with the Hilarious Humanitarian Instagram, I don't think I've shared it on the podcast. I know we've talked about it, but I was about 3 years ago. It was almost, October 2015. So 2 years ago, I started the Hilarious Humanitarian Instagram because I myself was being bullied at work, and I was going through a lot of like personal issues. I was feeling really depressed, and I just realized like I was so depressed at that point, like it was hard for me to put on clothes and like go to the grocery store. So thinking about like picking up the phone and making a therapy appointment just wasn't going to happen at that time. And I'm not sure, even looking back on it, I don't know if that's exactly what I needed. I just needed to feel like other people were out there.
Connection, right?
Yeah, connection, right. And I also felt capable of providing people some humor and healing, which ultimately ends up helping you, like helping others really does help you as well. So I started the Instagram account to connect people to a community that speaks towards mental health awareness, but also bringing like a light humorous feel to it where, like, we're in this together. I'm an awkward, funny woman living in Southern California who I considers myself warm, and I just wanted to kind of bring people into that world to feel less isolated. And apparently it's speaking towards a lot of people with the account growing. I really can't believe it. Like 300, I think this morning it was like 304,000 people are following. Like, that's
insane.
So weird to me. Like, it's weird, but it's not weird. Like, I know that there's a need out there, but then it's like, oh my God, so many people are like tuning into this Instagram page, and I get messages daily talking like, thank you so much for everything you're putting out there. It has really helped me through some really dark times. So I guess circling back to the whole therapy thing, like, therapists have a spot. Like, we definitely need to see therapists or a life coach or whatever it is, like, in certain times in our life. But other times it's like maybe reading a good self-help book, tapping into an Instagram page that gives you some laughter and peace in your life, turning off your TV and not listening to this fear-mongering, like, news channels.
Amen to that.
Right? Like, there's all these different things that we can do that can support our mental health and our healing, as opposed to like hindering us and just creating more anxiety.
So you mentioned this, some self-help books are a great thing to kind of, as you're trying to like kind of figure things out, right? Like, you're just realizing, I think life is supposed to be more than getting up, forcing myself to get ready, going to my job, which I hate, coming home and being frustrated with my family and my people and not being happy with that circumstance. Like, life needs to be more than that, right? Because otherwise, what is the reason for doing it all? Right. And one of the things, Instagram accounts, great ones like yours, can be really helpful for generating some of that positivity. But do you read, do you have any books in process right now that you're reading that are kind of helping you deal with certain things or become a better person or anything like that?
Yeah, right now, well, I have a few books. Like, I'm really bad at finishing books, but like, I am kind of a collector of like books in general.
I have three, by the way, real quick on that. I have three right now that I've started, and none of them I've finished.
Well, that's kind of like grad school, right? Like, I have all these textbooks. Like, I think I've read like 4 pages, and this textbook cost me $300. Like, what the heck? But no, I totally feel you. I eventually get to reading all of it, but having a new baby, like, I'm lucky if I can go to the bathroom without somebody barging in. So kind of going back to the books, I have one. I met this girl once again on Instagram, or woman. She's a PsyD. Her name's Tiffany, and she's got this book called Being an Awesomeness, Get Rad, Stay Rad, and it's hilarious, but it's very clinical, and I highly, highly recommend it. She's just awesome. I can't speak any more highly of her. She's super rad, and it's not like a stuffy book. It does talk about depression and anxiety and all these things that we have dealt with, but in a way where you can laugh. You can laugh at yourself. You can also be sensitive towards yourself and patience. There's that book. I also picked up that book that everybody's been talking about from Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Have you?
No, but I've heard about it, and it sounds just by the title like something I would read.
It's pretty friggin' good. I haven't finished it once again, but it's pretty good. And I do want to say, we're not in any way sponsored.
Oh no, we're basically just letting you in on some of the secrets that we do, because we're not just working in this field, but just being people. Again, it goes back to that you need to consume good things if you want to feel better.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, we're definitely not sponsored, for God's sakes.
But if you want to give us your money, that's more than.
Yeah, I have a P.O. box you can send me. I also love candy. You can send me stuff like that. But yeah, what books are you reading right now?
So there's a couple of them. One of them actually was a client of mine that read it when he was in treatment in the outpatient addiction center I was at, and it's called The 4 Agreements, and it's based on a kind of some ancient native people of in the Mexico area. The Toltec, I think, is what it was specifically, but it's just talking about the only thing you can control is what you're consuming, and how you interpret things and life in general. And so I just jumped into that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is speaking to me. There's also a book that I've been reading that's about, it's flow. I found it by watching a documentary on Netflix. And then another one, which is called Option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy. And this was by Sheryl Sandberg. And people who might know of the tech world, her husband was pretty big into, I think it was SurveyMonkey maybe, or Google, Facebook and stuff, or that's where she worked. And he died suddenly. And she talked about like what happens when your life falls apart. Like what do you do, right? So anyway, I have some of those, but I think what we're going to with this is that there's tons of books. There's Instagram accounts. Netflix is amazing in terms of things that you can watch and pull up on documentaries. Like, look, I love Stranger Things. I would love to watch, more of Narcos, but maybe after a crappy day, you should watch things that also feed it. You know what I mean? Like feed your soul in a different way.
Right, exactly. And I totally forgot, but I want to add. There's another book, and it's not. We can find like humor and healing in a host of things. Not even just books. Like, I don't know if you saw this when you came over to visit us when we met for the first time.
And I stayed at her house.
Yes, and we ate waffles and had fruit, and it was awesome. But I have like a massive amount of bubbles in our backyard, and a lot of people think that's for my kid. Oh no, those bubbles were there like long before I had a child. And like, so sometimes like our anxiety, I don't know about you, but like when I'm really anxious or depressed, like I can't even focus on reading a book. Like I'll read a paragraph over and over and over again, and it's just like not registering.
Yeah.
So instead, I'll literally just go outside, play some music, and blow bubbles. And that sounds so just childish, but I encourage everyone to try it. And not only that, like go into like a public space and like blow bubbles and watch people's reaction to like seeing bubbles flying in the air. And like it brings smiles to everybody. It is so healing. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm a weirdo. I'm totally okay with that idea.
Okay.
Yes, I am. You just got to find what works for you. There's another book. It's not necessarily like a self-help book, but there's a woman I met on Instagram as well. Her handle is Teacher Misery. Have you heard of her?
No, but I can understand the feeling.
Oh, she is so funny. She is a teacher, and she came out with a book called Teacher Misery, Helicopter Parents, Special Snowflakes, and Other Bullshit. And it's not self-help, but it is a collection of like short stories of her experiences as a teacher, like in the public teaching system. I cried laughing. Like the first couple pages I read, hysterically crying. Like my husband came into the room to check if I was okay, and it was just me hysterically like sobbing because I was laughing so hard at her writing. And oddly enough, it was like healing, because even though I'm not a teacher, I'm an advocate and an educator, and we deal with like very similar things, working for the public. And it was so validating. Like what it did was it gave me this experience of like, okay, I'm not the only one going to work and feeling frustrations, like intense frustration with the system or administration or whatever it is every single day. Like there are tons of people out there. And even though it doesn't solve the problem per se, it does help. At least it helps me mentally to know like, okay, I'm not living in this like isolated bubble where the only things bad that happens is only to me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Misery loves company in good and bad ways.
In good and bad. Right, exactly. And I'll even provide people like educational handouts. Like basically that's just a silly clinical word of here's a handout with some education about whether it's your diagnosis or just generalized anxiety or situations that like bring anxiety or depression. It's so powerful to read something and see yourself in it. Because then what that tells you is like, you're not alone. So many people are also going through this, which doesn't minimize your experience. I'm not trying to say you're not allowed to feel that way or who cares, because tons of other people have it harder than you or other people are going through the same thing. Not at all. It's find some empowerment in the fact that A lot of people do go through this. There is treatment. They do get better. And at the very least or most or whatever, there are tons of support resources that you can reach out to feel like within a community that really understand you. Because I think a lot of this is like people feeling judgment or shame or isolated, or people don't get me, or people don't understand what I'm going through. And that just kind of further, increase it. It feeds the depression and anxiety monster, whatever it is.
So I think on that note, what we want to kind of wrap up this podcast today with is that this podcast is still very new. So bear with us, because we're aiming to eventually be mediocre, but right now we're just newbies.
Yeah, it's a little bumpy and rocky, but I'm feeling it.
But you know what? Sometimes you just got to jump in. But I think that as we wrap things up, we were talking about in the beginning, like what we want to do with this podcast, and we want to be a resource. So the next time somebody asks this question of, hey, where do you go to start to feel better as you're on this journey towards trying to work on some of the mental health issues that you're dealing with, people can be like, we go to that hilarious Humanitarians podcast. So moving forward, that's kind of our plan. I challenge people as we wrap this up today to do what I have now deemed the Deanna a therapeutic approach to managing life's bullshit, which is go into public and blow bubbles.
Blow bubbles. Yes, 100. And please invite me. I'll bring bubble wands and like all sorts of machines. I've got quite the arsenal of bubble making.
I am very, very serious about this, and it might just become a thing where we go to random places and blow bubbles and see what happens.
We should do like a annual bubble blowing meetup. Like this is our tour. This is what we're going to do. Like, if we start doing speaker series, like just meet us in a park, bring like an awesome sandwich. We'll bring the bubbles. Because
trying to do a flash mob with a dance, it ain't going to happen for me.
It's not going to happen. My hip hurts. I'm not getting good sleep. I'm low energy. So blowing bubbles, yeah.
And I just look like there's something seriously wrong, and you should probably call an ambulance. Like, is that Frances trying to dance, or is she really in need of help of emergency services?
Yeah, well, if you do get whisked away in an ambulance, I will be following behind you blowing bubbles just to like put a smile on your face.
All right. Well, this has been episode 2. And
awesome.
We don't completely suck, but there's certainly room for improvement, and we appreciate you listening today.
Yeah. Tune in next time. We'll continue this journey of hopefully making you laugh and learning a few things on how to take care of yourself and take care of each other.
And blow bubbles.
And blow bubbles.